For 12 years, Layla had been the quiet force behind some of the biggest business deals between her multinational company and powerful investors in the Middle East. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the one who boasted about achievements. But when the stakes were high and conversations turned complex in Arabic, all eyes naturally turned to her. She was the bridge, the one who made billion-dollar dreams understandable, negotiable, and real. On the surface, it was just another Tuesday. The boardroom in Dubai shimmered with confidence. Polished suits, expensive watches, the faint hum of air conditioning that seemed to whisper wealth. Layla arrived early as she always did. Her notes were ready, her translation briefs crisp, and her mind sharp. Today's deal was monumental, a $2.5 billion contract that could redefine the company's global standing. Months of preparation had led to this moment, but what she didn't know was that her loyalty, her effort, and her years of experience were about to be tested in the most humiliating way possible. As the meeting began, she translated every word with precision. Every pause, every expression mattered. She could sense when a smile from the Arabic delegates meant agreement and when silence meant disagreement. She had a gift for reading the unspoken. Her boss, Richard, relied on that talent more than he ever admitted. He was the type who took credit in front of the board but leaned heavily on Layla behind closed doors. The negotiation moved smoothly until Richard leaned closer and whispered, "Step outside for a moment. We'll handle the rest." Layla blinked, confused. "But they just asked a question about the logistics." "It's fine," he interrupted sharply, his tone dismissive. "We can take it from here." She hesitated. The Arab investors were watching, waiting for her to translate. She could feel their uncertainty. But professionalism ruled her actions, and she quietly stood up, gathered her papers, and left the room. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with an email from HR. Her heart sank as she read the words. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Please return all company property." 12 years, gone in one email. She stood frozen in the hallway, her mind spinning. Fired? Now. In the middle of a negotiation that depended entirely on her ability to communicate with the other side? It didn't make sense. The timing was too abrupt, too cruel. When Richard finally stepped out, his expression was almost smug. "It's just business," he said lightly. "We can replace you anytime." Layla looked at him for a long second. There were no tears, no shouting, just a small, knowing smile. "I'm sure you can," she said softly, then turned and walked away. But inside, she knew the truth. He had no idea what he'd just done. The next morning was going to be interesting. That night, Layla couldn't sleep. She kept replaying everything in her mind. Every deal she'd helped secure. Every client she'd reassured in their native tongue when misunderstandings threatened progress. Every late night spent translating contracts, building trust, bridging worlds. She had been more than an employee. She had been the connection that made billions flow smoothly. And now, they had cut her off right before the final handshake. In her apartment overlooking the quiet city skyline, Layla sat by the window with her coffee, thinking about what would happen next. She knew the delegates. She knew their values, respect, trust, and honor mattered more than profit. And firing the person they trusted the most mid-deal? That would not go unnoticed. Across town, in the same hotel where the next negotiation session was scheduled, Richard prepared his notes. He was confident. He believed the Arabic side would cooperate regardless. Money spoke louder than loyalty, he thought. He had hired a quick replacement, a consultant from London who had basic conversational Arabic on his resume. That, he assumed, would be enough. The next morning, the conference room filled again. The Arab investors arrived punctually, their expressions unreadable. Richard greeted them warmly, but the atmosphere felt different. Colder. "Let's begin," he said, forcing a smile. His replacement interpreter sat beside him, nervous but eager. The first question came swiftly, complex, nuanced, filled with cultural layers only a native speaker could truly grasp. The consultant hesitated, searching for words. A long, awkward pause followed. The investors exchanged glances. Richard jumped in clumsily, trying to guess their intent, misinterpreting a key term in the process. The tone in the room shifted. Respect drained out of the air like water leaking from a cracked vessel. By noon, the investors stood up. "We will review the terms, their lead delegate said coldly in Arabic, a tone of finality that didn't require translation. When they left, Richard turned pale. He knew what that meant. By evening, the email arrived. The deal was off. The $2.5 billion contract had collapsed. Layla's phone buzzed again. A message from one of the delegates she'd known for years. It was simple. You deserve better. We trust you. She didn't reply immediately. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, she felt peace. She wasn't angry anymore. She had given her best, and the universe had a way of revealing truth without her saying a single word. As she watched the sun set over the city, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The world had just learned a costly lesson. Never underestimate the person who understands the language, the culture, and the heart behind every deal. The next chapter of her life was already writing itself, silently but powerfully. And while her former company scrambled to repair its shattered reputation, Layla was already in talks with new partners, ones who valued her, not just her skill. But before she signed anything, before she stepped into her next big move, there was something she wanted to do first. Something that would remind them exactly who they'd lost. She opened her laptop, drafted an email, and began typing. Her smile returned. The next morning was going to be fun. Layla's fingers hovered over the keyboard that night as the city outside glittered with the quiet confidence of those chasing dreams. Her apartment was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint buzz of her phone with unread messages. She wasn't rushing. She was thinking. For the first time in years, she had time to think for herself instead of for someone else's success. Every email she'd written before had been for Richard, for the board, for clients, for everyone but her. But this one felt different. It was for her. She opened a new document and began typing notes, not out of anger but with calm precision. She wrote down every key meeting, every Arabic translation she had been asked to simplify, every correction she'd made quietly to save the company from embarrassment. It wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping. A story of truth written in numbers, and words that no one had ever asked her to tell. The more she typed, the more she realized how much had gone unnoticed. She wasn't just a translator, she had been the invisible hand steering billion-dollar conversations. As the night deepened, flashes of the past 12 years returned. The first day she was hired, fresh out of university, when she nervously greeted Richard in Arabic, and he had laughed awkwardly, not understanding a word. Back then, he had been grateful. Over time, though, gratitude had faded into entitlement. The deals grew larger, the meetings more glamorous, but the respect she once felt began to crumble quietly. She remembered the long flights, the midnight calls with clients in Riyadh, the endless documents she had rewritten because someone else didn't understand cultural nuance. Every success was dressed up as a team victory, but she knew who had been holding it all together. Now, sitting in her apartment, she realized something bigger. It wasn't just about losing her job. It was about losing her voice in a place where she had once been essential. And somehow, that loss made her see things she'd ignored for too long. The next morning, while the world rushed into motion, Layla walked through the city streets calmly. She passed cafes where she used to grab coffee before work, familiar faces who still waved politely, unaware that her entire life had shifted overnight. Her phone buzzed again, calls from unknown numbers, probably from journalists or recruiters who had caught wind of the failed deal. She ignored them all. She wasn't ready to talk, not yet. In the corporate tower downtown, chaos was brewing. The $2.5 billion contract that was supposed to crown the company's reputation had fallen apart faster than anyone imagined. Emails flew between departments. The CEO wanted answers. Richard, red-eyed and restless, was scrambling to explain how a minor translation issue had turned into a total communication breakdown. The investors had gone silent, their trust evaporated. They didn't just feel insulted, they felt deceived. Richard knew it was bad, worse than he could admit. In the meeting the previous day, he had tried to smile through the awkwardness, but every mistranslated sentence had dug a deeper hole. When the delegates began switching to Arabic intentionally, testing his new interpreter, he had felt the room closing in. He hadn't understood their words, but he understood their tone. It was the sound of disappointment. Back in her apartment, Layla received a call she hadn't expected. It was from one of the delegates, Mr. Karim, a man she deeply respected. His voice carried warmth and a hint of regret. "We were surprised, Layla," he said. "No one informed us. You were the bridge. Without you, the discussion lost its meaning." Layla listened quietly, her heart tightening. "I understand," she replied softly. "It wasn't my decision." "I know," Karim said, "but decisions have consequences. Some lessons must be learned the hard way." When the call ended, she sat still for a long time. There was a mix of sadness and something else, clarity. She hadn't needed to fight back or defend herself. The truth had already begun speaking for her. Later that afternoon, she received another email. This one wasn't from her old company or the delegates. It was from a private consultancy in Qatar, one she had once helped during a crisis years ago. The subject line was simple: opportunity to lead. Layla didn't open it right away. Instead, she closed her laptop and looked around her apartment. Everything felt strangely quiet, but also open, like the air itself was giving her space to breathe. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't rushing towards someone else's deadline. Meanwhile, across the city, Richard's office door slammed as executives argued about damage control. Words like liability, loss, and reputation filled the air. His assistant handed him a report, her hands trembling slightly. "The clients pulled out completely," she said. "They mentioned a breach of trust." Richard rubbed his temples, his pride finally cracking under pressure. "Can we reach out to Layla?" he muttered. The assistant hesitated. "She's not answering calls. And honestly, sir, I don't think she wants to." That silence hurt more than any words could. Layla spent the evening walking by the waterfront, watching the lights shimmer on the surface of the water. She thought about how everything could change overnight. The job titles, the respect, the identity tied to work. But the one thing that couldn't be taken away was the value of knowing her worth. She remembered a phrase her father used to say when she was a child: "Your value doesn't disappear when others stop seeing it." Those words stayed with her now. She wasn't planning revenge. She was planning renewal. She knew the world of international business was small. Word traveled fast. And soon, everyone would know what had really happened. But she didn't need to tell that story herself. The results had already done that for her. Still, part of her wondered what Richard was doing, how he was reacting. She didn't want him to suffer, but she wanted him to understand. Sometimes losing the most valuable person wasn't about skills, it was about respect. She opened her email again and finally read the message from Qatar. They wanted her to head a new initiative, one focused on cross-cultural partnerships, exactly the kind of work she loved. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to build something from the ground up, something where her voice mattered. She smiled faintly, closed her eyes for a moment, and let herself imagine the possibility. But even with that hope, there was something unfinished, a quiet tension still lingering. Because deep down, she knew Richard wouldn't let it end there. He was too proud, too desperate to save his reputation. And she was right. Late that night, as the city lights flickered, Richard sat alone in his office. Everyone else had gone home. He stared at the contract drafts scattered on his desk and picked up his phone. He typed a message to Layla. "Can we talk?" He didn't send it right away. He deleted it, then rewrote it, softer this time. "I made a mistake. Please call me." But Layla never saw the message. Her phone was off, resting quietly on her bedside table as she drifted into her first peaceful sleep in months. Outside, the world kept spinning. The company was in damage control, rumors spreading through financial circles, analysts questioning leadership decisions, investors pulling inquiries. Every headline carried the same undertone: how arrogance had cost billions. And somewhere between those stories, Layla's name began to surface in whispers. Not as a victim, but as the one who had held everything together until they broke it apart. Her story was no longer confined to one office or one deal. It was becoming a reminder to every company, every executive, every leader, that skill and loyalty should never be underestimated. The tension was still there, unresolved and growing. Layla didn't know it yet, but the next move Richard would make would test everything she had rebuilt. And the next morning, once again, promised to be anything but ordinary. ChatGPT said. Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. The failed $2.5 billion deal had become the talk of the business world. News outlets picked up the story, investors whispered about it in private meetings, and social media threads buzzed with theories. Inside the company, the atmosphere was heavy. People avoided eye contact in hallways. Everyone knew something had gone terribly wrong, but no one dared to say it aloud. Richard was under pressure like never before. The board wanted answers, the clients were demanding explanations, and his own team was beginning to lose confidence in him. He sat in his glass-walled office, staring at the city's skyline, the same view that once made him feel powerful. Now it only reminded him of what he had lost. Every time his phone buzzed, his chest tightened. Another message, another meeting, another reminder that the empire he'd built on pride was slowly crumbling. He knew the truth deep down. Without Layla, he was blind in a world that spoke a language he couldn't understand. Meanwhile, Layla had quietly accepted the consultancy offer from Qatar. It wasn't about revenge or competition, it was about starting fresh. The new company had a reputation for valuing talent and cultural intelligence, two things she had always believed in. When she joined the first meeting remotely, her new colleagues greeted her warmly. Their tone was respectful, their questions curious. For the first time in years, she felt heard. But even as she began to rebuild her life, a quiet unease followed her. The past wasn't finished with her yet. One evening, her old friend from the company, Sarah, called her. Sarah had been one of the few who truly appreciated Layla's work. Her voice was tense over the phone. "Layla, I shouldn't be saying this," she whispered, "but Richard is trying to shift the blame. He's saying the deal collapsed because you didn't complete the final translation before you left." Layla froze. "That's not true," she said quietly. "The translation was done days before the meeting. He had everything." "I know," Sarah replied, "but the board doesn't, and they're looking for someone to blame. You're not there to defend yourself." Layla felt a rush of disbelief mixed with calm anger. She had always known how easily the truth could be twisted in the corporate world. Facts became flexible when power was threatened. Still, she wasn't going to respond impulsively. "Let him talk," she finally said. "The truth has its own timing." Sarah hesitated. "There's more. He's also trying to contact the delegates again. He's planning a private meeting to convince them to reopen the deal." Layla's eyes darkened slightly. She knew that wouldn't go well. Trust, once broken in Middle Eastern business culture, was rarely restored. The delegates had already seen the company's true colors, but Richard didn't understand that. He thought money could fix anything. Across the ocean, in a tall boardroom lit with golden evening light, the same investors were discussing what had happened. Mr. Karim, calm but firm, spoke to his team. They thought replacing her would make no difference. They forgot that relationships, not contracts, hold the foundation of trust. "We don't deal in language, we deal in respect." His words carried weight. He leaned back inside. "But perhaps it's time we work with people who understand that." Layla's name came up naturally in their discussion. They knew her value. They knew she had been the voice that connected both sides, not just through language but through empathy. And quietly, they decided that if she ever led a project again, they would listen. At the same time, Richard's company was falling into deeper trouble. Several smaller clients began to withdraw, worried about instability. The board called for an emergency meeting, their voices sharp and impatient. "You said this was under control," one of them snapped. "You said you had it handled." Richard tried to stay composed, but the cracks showed. "It was a misunderstanding," he insisted. "We can recover if we re-establish contact." "Without her," another executive cut in. "She was the reason we even got those contacts in the first place." The room went silent. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone knew it was true. Later that night, Richard sat alone again, replaying his decision in his head. Firing Layla mid-deal had seemed bold in the moment, an act of authority. Now it looked like self-destruction. The more he tried to justify it, the worse it sounded. But pride is a powerful thing, and he couldn't bring himself to publicly admit he had been wrong. He began drafting a proposal to present to the board, a recovery plan. It included a section about strategic partnerships, a thinly veiled idea of reaching out to Layla. He didn't want to ask her directly, but he was running out of options. His company needed her expertise, and he knew it. At the same time, Layla's days were filling with new energy. Her new role challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. She was leading projects that connected businesses from different cultures, helping others avoid the same mistakes her old company had made. Each success reminded her of how much she had grown and how much she had been undervalued before. But beneath her calm surface, there was still a storm. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. One evening, she received an unexpected message from a familiar address. It was Richard. The subject line simply read, "Can we talk?" She stared at the screen, unreadable emotions flickering in her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't open it. The thought of facing him again brought back the memory of that humiliating day, the moment he told her, "We can replace you anytime." But something inside her whispered that this wasn't just about closure. This was about power shifting, about unfinished business finding its way back. When she finally opened the email, it was brief. "I know things ended badly. The company is in a difficult position. I would appreciate a conversation if you're willing." Layla didn't reply immediately. She closed her laptop and looked out at the night sky. The city lights shimmered below, and for a moment, she could almost hear her father's voice again. "Never let them see you beg for what you already deserve." She wasn't sure if she wanted to help him, but curiosity tugged at her. What would he say if she agreed to meet? Would he apologize? Or would he try to use her again to save himself? The thought lingered as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the boardroom scene, the investors' faces, the betrayal she'd endured. The next morning, she opened her laptop again and began to draft her response, but then she stopped. Maybe it was too soon to reply. Maybe she wanted him to wait, just as she had waited for acknowledgement all those years. Across the city, Richard refreshed his inbox over and over, waiting for her reply. None came, and as the silence grew longer, so did his desperation. He knew that without her, the company might not survive another quarter. For Layla, the silence wasn't avoidance, it was strength. She was no longer the employee waiting for approval. She was the one holding the power now, and she knew it. Still, beneath that quiet strength, tension simmered. A part of her wondered what would happen if they did meet again. Would it bring closure, or open a new conflict that neither of them was ready for? The answer was coming, and when it did, it would change everything again. The next few days were heavy with silence, the kind that carries weight even across cities. Layla tried to stay focused on her new projects, but her mind kept wandering back to that one unread message. It sat in her inbox like a shadow she couldn't ignore. Every time she saw Richard's name, a small part of her wanted to know what he really wanted, but another part of her resisted, afraid of reopening the wounds she had just begun to heal. Meanwhile, at the company headquarters, the pressure on Richard was reaching its breaking point. The board demanded results. Clients were questioning his leadership. Journalists were beginning to dig into the story, and rumors had started spreading that his decision to fire Layla had directly led to the billion-dollar collapse. He denied it publicly, but deep down he knew it was true. Without Layla's credibility and her deep understanding of Arabic business culture, he was lost in a world he didn't understand. Desperation has a way of changing people, and that desperation was now guiding his every move. He began sending emails to everyone he could think of, old contacts, translators, consultants, but no one could bridge the trust gap Layla once had. The investors refused every invitation. They wanted nothing to do with the company that had humiliated someone they respected. Each rejection tightened the noose around Richard's reputation. Late one evening, Richard sat in his office surrounded by files and unanswered calls. The city outside looked cold through the glass walls. He had built his entire career on control, controlling meetings, outcomes, people. But now, he was losing control faster than he could hide it. He opened his laptop again and stared at Layla's email thread. He knew this was his last chance. He typed one more message. "Layla, I know I've made mistakes. I should never have treated you the way I did. But we need to meet. Please. I can explain." He hesitated before pressing send, his pride warring with panic. Then he closed his eyes and clicked the button. That night, while the message made its way across the digital space, Layla was sitting by her window, watching the city lights blur against the glass. She hadn't checked her inbox all day. She had been deep in meetings, working on her new role, preparing presentations that reflected her strength and experience. Yet, somewhere inside, She could feel that something was shifting. The calm before a storm always had a certain silence to it, and she could feel that silence now. When she finally opened her email later that night, she saw his message. It was longer this time, more personal. For a moment, she thought about deleting it, but curiosity won. She read it slowly, her eyes scanning every line, searching for sincerity. There was regret in his words, maybe even fear. But she didn't trust him, not yet. Still, part of her wanted to look him in the eyes, to see if the man who had dismissed her so easily could finally admit he was wrong. After a long pause, she typed a short reply. We can meet. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Al Noor Hotel Cafe. The moment she hit send, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. It wasn't fear, it was the weight of everything unsaid. Tomorrow, she would face him again after everything he had done. And though she told herself it was just a conversation, deep down she knew this meeting would change everything. The next morning, the cafe was quiet. The scent of strong coffee mixed with the faint murmur of morning traffic outside. Layla arrived early as she always did. She wore a simple navy suit, calm and composed, her expression unreadable. When Richard walked in, she noticed how much he had changed. His confident posture was gone, replaced by exhaustion and strain. The arrogance that once filled his voice had faded, replaced by something softer, almost nervous. He approached her table with a forced smile. "Layla," he said quietly, "you look well." "Better than before," she replied evenly. He sat down, fumbling slightly with his briefcase. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Finally, he broke the silence. "I made a mistake," he said. "I shouldn't have fired you. I was under pressure and Layla interrupted softly. "You were afraid, not of losing control, but of losing credit. You couldn't stand that someone else was more trusted than you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. She was right, and they both knew it. He sighed, leaning forward. "The company is collapsing, Layla. The investors won't speak to us. They only trust you. I need your help to fix this." Layla looked at him for a long moment, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "You didn't need my help when you fired me," she said quietly. "You said I was replaceable." "I was wrong," he admitted quickly. "You weren't replaceable. You were the reason it all worked." The honesty in his voice almost surprised her. But still, she felt that familiar caution inside. She wanted to believe him, yet the wound was too deep. "So what do you want now?" she asked. "I want you to come back," he said. "Even if just temporarily. Help us rebuild the trust. I'll make it right." Layla stared at him, silent. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions. The offer was tempting, not because of the job, but because of what it represented. A chance to reclaim her story on her own terms. Yet she knew accepting could also pull her back into the same cycle of manipulation. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Karim flashed across the screen. She glanced at it quickly and froze. The text read, "Be careful. He's trying to use your name to reopen the deal behind your back." Her heart dropped slightly, but her face remained composed. She placed her phone face down on the table and looked back at Richard. He was watching her closely, trying to read her expression. Inside, Layla's mind was racing. So this was it. He hadn't changed at all. He was still playing the same game, using her credibility as his last chance to save himself. The realization cut deep, but it also gave her clarity. The power had shifted completely now, and he didn't even see it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "You're asking for my help," she said. "But tell me honestly, Richard, do you want to fix the company, or do you just want to save yourself?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted away, and that was enough of an answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. Layla stood slowly, gathering her things. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said quietly. "But it won't be me." Richard stood too, panic flashing across his face. "Layla, please listen." But she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her posture calm and unshaken. As she stepped out into the sunlight, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Karim appeared. "He's calling an emergency meeting with the board. He's desperate." Layla looked up at the bright sky, her heart steady now. The final confrontation was coming. She could feel it building like a storm waiting to break. Richard was cornered, and people like him were dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. That night, as the city lights glimmered in the distance, two stories were unfolding at once, one of desperation, one of strength. Richard was preparing for one last attempt to save his empire. Layla, calm but alert, knew it was time to face whatever came next. The stage was set. The truth was ready to surface, and both of them were standing on the edge of something that could destroy one, or redeem the other. The city never really slept, and neither did the tension that had started to ripple through its glass towers. The night after her meeting with Richard, Layla sat alone on her balcony, watching the distant lights fade into the horizon. Her phone had stopped buzzing for the first time all day, but the silence felt uneasy. Something inside her told her this wasn't over, that Richard's desperation hadn't reached its peak yet. And she was right. Across town, Richard sat in his office long after midnight, staring at his laptop. The board meeting was in the morning, and he had nothing left to offer them except excuses. His plan to use Layla's name to reopen the deal had backfired. The investors had refused every call, and now word had spread to other partners. No one wanted to work with a company accused of disrespecting cultural protocol. His career was hanging by a thread. But then, an idea hit him, reckless, risky, but maybe his last chance. He opened a new email draft and began typing. By dawn, a message was sent, not to Layla, not to the board, but to Mr. Karim himself. It was a desperate attempt to regain favor. He claimed that Layla had reached out privately and was willing to mediate a new version of the deal under a different arrangement. He even attached a falsified document with her name, pretending she had signed a letter of interest. It was the kind of move that could either save him or destroy him completely. Layla knew nothing of it yet. She woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications blinked on her screen, emails, calls, and one message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her chest tightened. It was a forwarded email, Richard's fake message, and it was already spreading. The subject line read, "Layla agrees to rejoin talks." Her hands went cold. Within hours, the rumor had made its way through business circles. People were congratulating her, journalists were reaching out for interviews, and her new employers were asking for clarification. In a single night, her name was back in the spotlight, but not in the way she wanted. She called Mr. Karim immediately. "That message wasn't from me," she said firmly. "I haven't signed anything." "I know," he replied calmly. "That's why I sent it to you. But it's spreading fast, Layla. Someone is trying to use your reputation again." Her heartbeat quickened. "It's Richard," she said quietly. "He's trying to save himself." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Then you must be careful. People like him don't stop when they're desperate, they double down." As the call ended, Layla leaned back in her chair, staring at her reflection in the glass window. It was happening all over again, her name being used, her credibility twisted. But this time, she wasn't powerless. She had allies now, people who respected her voice. And if Richard wanted a battle, she was ready to face it differently. By afternoon, her inbox filled with messages from reporters asking for a statement. She drafted one carefully, calm but direct. "Any claims that I have rejoined negotiations are false. I am no longer affiliated with the company or its management. Integrity matters more than contracts." Within an hour, her statement was everywhere, business forums, LinkedIn posts, even local news. And as the story gained traction, the focus shifted again. Now, everyone wanted to know who had spread the false information. The investigation pointed straight to Richard's company. Inside his office, Richard could feel the storm closing in. His assistant entered, pale-faced, holding a printed email. "Sir, they know. The board wants to see you immediately." He grabbed the paper, scanning it quickly. Layla's statement stared back at him in bold letters, circulating across every major news outlet. His stomach dropped. He hadn't expected her to respond so quickly or so powerfully. What he thought would be a clever move had turned into a public disaster. That evening, the boardroom was tense. The directors sat in silence as the CEO glared at Richard. "You forged her name," the CEO said slowly, disbelief in his voice. "Do you understand what this means? You didn't just lose the contract. You've destroyed our credibility." Richard tried to defend himself, his voice shaking. "I was trying to fix it. She wouldn't talk to me. I thought." "You thought lying would rebuild trust," another board member snapped. "You've cost us more than money, Richard. You've cost us reputation." As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Richard realized the truth. This was the end of his career. The empire he had built, the power he had once held, was slipping through his fingers faster than he could hold on. Meanwhile, Layla received a call from an unfamiliar number that night. It was a senior executive from one of the world's largest trade firms. "We've been following the situation," he said politely. "You handled it with grace. We'd like to meet." She didn't answer right away. Her mind was still processing everything, the betrayal, the twist, the strange sense of relief that came with it. "Thank you," she finally said. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for new negotiations yet." "I understand," the voice replied. "But sometimes the best stories begin right after everything falls apart." After the call ended, Layla sat quietly for a long time. The night air was cool, the city below her buzzing faintly. She realized how far she'd come from the woman who had once sat in that boardroom translating words for others. Now, people were quoting her words, her statement. Her truth had become the voice others listened to. But beneath the calm, a new tension was forming. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sarah, her old colleague. "Be careful, Layla. Richard isn't done. He's blaming you now." Layla's heart sank slightly, though she didn't show it. She opened the message thread, reading the forwarded memo. Richard was now claiming that she had leaked company information to the investors, and that she was trying to sabotage them from outside. It was a desperate lie, but in the world of business, even lies had power if told loudly enough. The headlines began to shift again. Her name was being dragged into debates about ethics, loyalty, and betrayal. Some defended her. Others questioned her motives. She was no longer just a translator or a director. She was the center of a corporate storm that had captured everyone's attention. Yet amid the noise, Layla stayed calm. She had faced humiliation before and survived it. Now, she understood the game, and this time, she wouldn't play it by their rules. She began gathering evidence quietly, emails, records, meeting notes, all the truth she had kept for years. She wasn't seeking revenge, but she was done being silent. Across the city, Richard sat in his darkened office, staring at his reflection. The walls felt smaller now, the silence heavier. He knew the truth was coming for him, but he wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. There was still one move left to make, one final card to play. And as Layla pressed send on an email marked confidential, one that could expose everything, the two of them were heading toward a collision neither could avoid. The tension had never been higher. The stakes were no longer just about a deal or a company. It was about truth versus pride, integrity versus desperation. And as the night deepened, the world waited for what would happen when those two forces finally met head-on. The next morning began with the kind of quiet that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Layla arrived early at her new firm, the one that had stood by her through the chaos. The skyline outside her window looked calm, but she knew the calm never lasted long in the corporate world. She had just sent out her final document, an official report with undeniable proof that Richard had fabricated the email, tampered with the company's communication system, and manipulated signatures. Every timestamp, every file, every trace was verified. It was the final piece she had been waiting for. By noon, her email had reached the International Arbitration Office, the company's legal team, and the press. What followed was a storm. Within an hour, her phone lit up with calls and messages. News outlets ran the headline, "Evidence confirms forgery in $2.5 billion contract scandal." Her name was no longer being questioned, it was being vindicated. Across the city, in that same boardroom where it had all begun, Richard sat surrounded by a wall of silence. The director stared at him as the evidence flashed on the screen, line after line of digital proof he couldn't deny. His usual sharp tone was gone. He looked smaller, drained. The CEO's voice cut through the room. "You didn't just lie," he said coldly. "You tried to bury someone who built the very bridge you destroyed." Richard tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. 4 years, he had been the man with control, the one who never got caught. But this time, the truth had arrived before him. The company's legal advisor stood up and handed him a letter. "You're suspended effective immediately. The investigation will proceed without your involvement." He didn't argue. He just nodded, slowly packing the few papers on his desk, the reality sinking in. The career he'd spent decades building had collapsed in a single morning, just like the contract he thought he could control. Layla, on the other hand, didn't feel triumph. She felt something quieter, relief mixed with exhaustion. She had fought for truth, not revenge, and she knew the cost of both. But just when it seemed like everything had settled, an unexpected call came. It was from Mr. Karim. "Layla," he said warmly, "we've reviewed everything. We've decided to reopen the deal, but under new terms. This time, I want to negotiate directly with you." Her breath caught for a second. "With me?" "Yes," he said. "Not with the company, not with Richard. You have the trust that others lost. And to be honest, you were the bridge all along." The moment felt unreal. The same deal that had fallen apart because of arrogance in politics was now being offered back to her, but on her terms. The deal wasn't just about money now. It was about dignity, recognition, and integrity. She accepted calmly, though her hands trembled slightly when she hung up. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, she met Mr. Karim in person. The meeting was quiet, respectful, and filled with mutual understanding. They didn't talk about revenge or losses. They talked about rebuilding something with trust. "You know," he said with a small smile, "sometimes losing everything clears the way for what should have been there from the start." But as she walked out of that meeting, one more surprise awaited her. On her phone, a message appeared from an unknown sender. "You think it's over? Check the news." Her heart skipped. She opened her browser and saw it immediately, an article breaking online. Disgraced executive Richard Green joins competitor company amid ongoing investigation. The twist hit like a cold wind. He wasn't gone. He had found another door, another way back into the game. The man who had almost destroyed everything wasn't finished. For a moment, she felt that old anger rise again, but then she smiled faintly. The difference this time was clear. She wasn't the same person anymore. She didn't need to fight a shadow. The truth was already out, and the world had seen who he truly was. His name would follow him wherever he went. She returned home that night and stood on her balcony again, the same spot where months ago she'd stared into the darkness, wondering what would come next. Now the city lights seemed softer, more forgiving. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a simple message from her assistant. "Congratulations, Director Layla. The new contract is signed." The words sank in slowly. Director. Not the only Arabic-speaking advisor. Not the woman who was fired. Just director. It wasn't just a title. It was proof that she had rebuilt herself from the ashes of humiliation. And yet, there was one last twist, a quiet one. As she was closing her laptop later that night, she noticed an unread email in her inbox. The sender's name made her pause. It was from Richard. The subject line read, "You were right." She opened it carefully. The message was short. "I lost everything I tried to protect. But watching how you stood your ground, I learned something. Maybe the deal wasn't meant to be mine after all." Layla sat back, staring at the screen. For the first time, she didn't feel anger or bitterness. She just felt peace. She deleted the email without replying, not out of spite, but out of closure. Some stories didn't need answers. They just needed to end. The next day, she walked into her new office. The walls were bright, the energy calm. Her team greeted her with smiles, and on her desk sat a simple note from her assistant. "Welcome home." She looked out the window at the skyline once more, remembering the night she had walked away from the boardroom with nothing but her pride. Now, she had everything she had worked for, and none of it came from revenge. It came from patience, truth, and the quiet strength of knowing her worth. And as the camera of her story faded on her face, the final words lingered in the air. They fired her thinking she was replaceable. But they forgot you can't replace integrity. It was the perfect ending. Yet somewhere in another corner office, Richard was already staring at a new blank contract, thinking of ways to begin again. Because in the world of business, endings are rarely ever final. They're just another beginning waiting for the next move. The weeks after the deal's revival moved slowly but steadily, almost as if the universe itself was giving Layla the time to breathe again. The noise, the rumors, the headlines, all of it began to fade. What replaced it was a quiet kind of respect that doesn't need applause. People who had once doubted her now sought her guidance. Those who had underestimated her came forward with apologies, subtle or silent. And through it all, she didn't gloat. She just focused on building something that would last. Her first meeting as director was held in the same glass conference room where she had once sat as the only Arabic-speaking executive, silent, overlooked, translating words that others took credit for. But this time, everyone looked to her for direction. When she spoke, the room listened. Her calm voice carried authority not through volume but through presence. She began by thanking her team, not for loyalty, but for courage, the courage to stand for truth when it wasn't easy. That tone became the heart of her leadership. The new contract with Kareem's firm was not just a business deal. It became a symbol of what integrity could rebuild when ego had torn everything down. This time, every clause was clear, every agreement transparent, every person at the table treated as equal. Layla had made sure of it. She worked late nights, not out of fear of failure, but out of a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just negotiating numbers. She was shaping trust between two worlds. In one quiet moment after a long meeting, Mr. Kareem approached her privately. "You know," he said softly, "when we first started talking years ago, I thought you were just another skilled interpreter. But you've shown what real leadership looks like. You never needed to shout. You just needed to be heard." Layla smiled. "Sometimes people mistake silence for weakness," she said. "But silence is only dangerous when it's forced. When it's chosen, it becomes strength." The two shared a brief laugh, then returned to work. But those words stayed with her long after. Outside the business world, her life began to settle too. Her mother, who had quietly worried through the entire ordeal, finally allowed herself to celebrate. "I always told you," she said over tea one evening, "when people try to bury you, it's because they see something that shines." Layla smiled, realizing how right she was. For so long, she had blamed herself for being the one singled out, the one pushed aside. Now she understood. It had never been her flaw. It had been her difference that unsettled them, and that difference had become her power. Meanwhile, Richard's story had all but disappeared from the headlines. The company he had joined was cautious about his involvement, and though he tried to rebuild, the trust he'd once commanded was gone. He had the same skills, the same sharp mind, but no one wanted to risk another scandal. Layla sometimes heard his name in business conversations, mentioned briefly before fading away. She never spoke ill of him. In her heart, the chapter was closed. Months later, during an international summit, Layla found herself on stage, speaking to a crowd about cultural diplomacy and ethical leadership in global trade. It wasn't a speech she had planned to give, but one she had been invited to deliver because of her story. As she stood under the bright lights, looking at faces from different nations, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. "I learned," she told the audience, "that language isn't just about words. It's about respect. You can speak every language in the world, but if you don't listen, really listen, you'll never understand anyone. I was once told I was replaceable because of what I could speak, but what truly mattered was what I stood for." The hall filled with quiet applause, not loud or theatrical, but genuine. It wasn't the kind of recognition she had once dreamed of. It was better. It was the kind that comes from truth. After the summit, as she walked through the quiet corridors of the venue, she ran into a familiar face, Sarah, her old colleague. They hadn't spoken much since everything ended. Sarah looked different now, more confident. "I watched your speech," she said with a grin. "You've come a long way." Layla nodded. "So have you." They walked outside together, talking about life, change, and the strange way time heals what ambition can't. Before parting, Sarah paused. "You know, back when they fired you, I thought it was over for you. But now I see, you were just getting started." That night, as Layla drove home, the city lights glimmered across the skyline. Every building seemed to tell a story of people who had failed, rebuilt, and learned to stand again. She realized her story wasn't unique. It was just one of many, about resilience, dignity, and the quiet strength of doing what's right even when no one's watching. When she reached home, she stood by her balcony again, the same spot where so many turning points had begun. The air felt lighter now, the view clearer. She thought of the past, not with anger, but with gratitude. Every closed door, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led her here. She whispered softly to herself, it was never about revenge. It was about respect. In the months that followed, her company flourished. The New Deal opened opportunities not just for her, but for dozens of young professionals who looked up to her as a role model. She made sure her team was diverse, inclusive, and grounded in the values she had fought for. Every decision she made carried the quiet reminder of what happens when integrity leads. And though she rarely thought of Richard anymore, there was one morning when a letter arrived at her office with no return address. Inside was a single page. It wasn't an apology, it was a thank you. You taught me, it read, that winning isn't about holding power. It's about earning it. She placed the letter in her drawer, not as a memory of pain, but as proof that even the hardest stories can end with understanding. As time passed, the scandal became a case study in leadership circles, a story told in seminars and business schools under the title, The $2.5 billion Lesson. People discussed the fall of arrogance and the rise of integrity. Layla's name became synonymous with resilience, not rebellion. On one quiet evening years later, while mentoring a young professional, she shared her final reflection. When they fired me, I thought they'd ended my story. But they only ended a chapter. You don't need to fight for a seat at every table. Sometimes, you're meant to build a new one. The young woman smiled, inspired. Layla looked out the window again at the city she had once feared to face. The lights below seemed endless, like a sea of new beginnings. And as she turned off her desk lamp for the night, her heart carried a simple truth. The best victories are the ones that restore, not destroy. Her story had started with a firing, a betrayal, and a broken deal. But it ended with dignity, peace, and a legacy built on trust. And though she never sought fame, her name became a quiet reminder across industries. Never underestimate the power of integrity. Because in the end, integrity always wins. And with that, the story of the woman they thought was replaceable came full circle. The deal that had once collapsed became the foundation of something far greater, a future led by respect, honesty, and the courage to walk away when silence no longer serves.